Top of the morning, fight fans. This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Gary Russell Jr. He officially calls out Gervonta Tank Davis, and he also explains why he only fights once a year. And of course, he's been labeled as Mr. Once a Year for the better half of the last decade. And this is what he had to say concerning that. He said, "I've been calling out everyone who's supposed to be somebody. I think the reason you only see me competing once a year is because a lot of these fighters, a lot of these promoters and managers don't feel as though it's in their best interest to put their fighter in front of me." He says, "I'm not at all satisfied fighting once a year. I would love to be able to compete and display my skills and my abilities to my fans, to the people who generally love the work and the effort that I put in. I just play the cards that are dealt with." Of course, we know Gary Russell. He lost once to Vasil Lomachenko back in the day, and that was at 126. But, you know, he's willing to go from 126 to 130 to 135. And let me counterpunch what he said, okay? He mentioned the promoters, the managers. They don't think that it's a good idea to put someone skilled like him in the ring. That may be true with some fighters. But I think what he should really be focusing on is not these promoters and managers, you know, of other people. I think he should be worried about his own. Because, see, you can't say, hey, I think a lot of these promoters and managers don't feel as though it's in their best interest, right? Then turn around and say, man, I just play the cards that are dealt with. Well, who's dealing you the cards, right? You could say, well, they don't want to fight you, so I can go with the flow. I get that. But then if you really read into it, who's his advantage? Who's his advisor? His advisor is Al Heyman. You know, and I think Al could get him fights. He gets everyone else fights. Why not Gary Russell Jr.? In fact, Gary Russell Jr. is probably the most outspoken Al Heyman fighter that we have, probably since Keith Thurman used to be. If you remember, "You better not duck me, thun," that guy, okay? That, you know, his S's were TH's back in the day. You know, they probably still are a lot of the times, you know, before the injury and all that stuff. But Keith Thurman was getting fights. Gary Russell's not getting fights. And what I feel about him calling out Gervonta Tank Davis, I think Davis needs to finally officially fight someone that is on a high caliber level. And I know they're trying to build that guy and build that guy and build that guy. But I think if Al Heyman was to actually give it to Gary Russell, I think he was talking about his own management. Because you think about it. What if Gary Russell goes in there and fights Gervonta Tank Davis and beats him? Everybody say, oh, man, Tank will smoke him. Tank has the power. Tank does have the power, and he has very good skill. I think he's a very good fighter, but at the end of the day, someone like Gary Russell Jr. could spoil the whole damn program because he's not that guy that is looked at and reviewed or they're trying to push for a superstar status. He's that guy that only fights one time a year. So I think it's not these other promoters, and if they are the other promoters, I think it's also his company, his management, his advisors, rather, that's really holding him back. That's what I feel. You know, and I feel that maybe if he was with Golden Boy or something like that, he could get a fight with like Ryan Garcia or something, you know, to that degree, instead of fighting once a year, because he says, hey, I don't like to put it in, but hey, I just play the cards that I'm dealt with. Well, damn, if the cards you're dealing with and you're only causing you to fight once a year, shouldn't you get a better deck of cards? Counterpunch, because it seems like to me, you know, a guy that is skillful as Gary Russell, one of the fastest fighters in sports, in boxing right now. Very quick, love the combinations, and he has a lot more power than people give him credit for because he catches you with punches that you don't see. That's the power, and well, that's the advantage of Gary Russell Jr. And calling out someone like Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't know if he'll get a fight like that, but you got to ask yourself a question. If these other fighters and these other promoters, they're not giving you an opportunity from elsewhere, and you're only fighting once a year, and you still don't get the fights, again, I think he needs to figure out a way to get a better deck of cards, get better management. Because if you, as a saying goes, if you want something you never had, you got to do something you never done, right? And my advice to Gary Russell Jr., I think he needs to follow that, because there's another saying that goes without saying, that's added to that particular phrase, and that is, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're always going to get what you're always going to get. That's why he was once he is now called Mr. Once a Year. So if he wants to stop being called once a year, I think, and he doesn't get this fight, he needs to find out where else to go. Look at Andy Ruiz for a perfect example, right? Andy Ruiz, when he lost to Joseph Parker went on to become the WBO champion. He lost on a split decision, and Bob Arum decided not to even promote this guy any further. But what did he do? Did he wait around? No. If he would have waited around, he might have been also called Mr. Once a Year, just like Gary Russell Jr. But anyway, you guys tell me what you think of Gary Russell Jr. calling out Gervonta Tank Davis for a reckoning. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunched. Peace.